We are here today to mourn the murder of James Wakasa, and we are here to rejoice at the discovery of the memorial stone. We are here because the stone which our grandfathers buried was shoveled up and dragged away by the Topaz Museum. We are here today to share our outrage and to offer our support to all Japanese who have suffered this insult. The 1,000-pound stone is concrete evidence of the injustice and the daily threat of wanton murder our families faced every day. They were confined at Topaz and other concentration camps. Reverend Jerry Hirano.
Good morning, everyone. We'll begin with sutra chanting, and then for those who would like, please come around to this side for oshoko, or incense burning. Namandavats. Gagon chosegan hishimu jodo shigan manzog sev joshogak ojo andako. Namandavats. You know, last year, some of you have seen my RV. I took a 15,000-mile trip to see what America was. So I visited all 48 states, and I had a similar service like this at significant places. I started at the Wakamatsu Tea and Silk Colony in Sacramento, moved through California, went to Minidoka, went to Heart Mountain, went to the site in honor of Breonna Taylor, went to Black Wall Street, in various of these places, just to remember and hold a service, because here in America, diversity should be the foundation. But oftentimes, as Topaz here is an example of, it just doesn't happen. I know that Mr. Wakasa was a Christian, but I hope that this small religious service encompasses all of us, Buddhist, Christian, atheist, to try to come together in what America should be and could be like. So thank you all for joining us this morning. You may come forward, shoko, and then offer a flower before the cross there.
We lived in Topaz for all of 1943. I was then 9 years old. Oftentimes, after dinner in the mess hall, my siblings and friends would venture out past the barracks into the open areas searching for artifacts or anything unusual to bring back. On some occasions, we would encounter an elderly man who also happened to be looking for things, too, and would chide us that it's getting late and go back home. One evening, a friend and I happened to cross paths with him as we were heading back to the barracks. Suddenly, we heard a series of pop, pop, like firecrackers behind us, and we just ran as fast as we could. never looking back. My mother took me to the funeral service, and seeing Mr. Wakasa lying in the casket and the singing of the hymn Rock of Ages had haunted me for years. Bad memories are hard to erase.
How do you remember a friend? How do you grieve a murder? How do you express pain and outrage over the cold-blooded killing of an innocent man who was shot through the heart while walking his dog? That's what this stone represents. Outrage, grief, courage, and a sacred message from our ancestors to us. Never forget James Hatsuaki Wakasa. Never forget the danger and humiliation that we lived under the guard towers of Topaz. That's why the builders chose a giant memorial stone. It's said to measure 57 inches and weigh some 1,000 pounds. Did you know that Wakasa was an optimist about the United States, arriving here when he was 23 years old, a fresh graduate from Keio University, and that he kept a portrait of Abraham Lincoln in his barrack? He was not an old, deaf man trying to escape. That was the lie spread by our government to justify his killing. Most newspaper headlines said, "Jap killed trying to escape." One Pennsylvania newspaper may have gotten closer to the truth. Its headline was, "Target Practice." After Wakasa's friends erected the monument in violation of a quote-unquote agreement not to, near where he died on his back bleeding into the ground, camp authorities and the U.S. War Department ordered it destroyed. But our defiant Issei builders didn't destroy it, they buried it. And they left a small part of it showing so that future generations, so that we could find it. It's a miracle, and we're so grateful to the archaeologists who did that. We are outraged that, in the words of Karen Korematsu, our sacred ground was violently assaulted and the monument shoveled out and hauled here on a pallet by a local worker who was pulled off his job cleaning garbage from another part of the camp to drag the stone out of its resting place. And that's why we traveled 800 miles from California today in the footsteps of our parents and grandparents. We'd like to know more about this stone. We know that even though the museum was advised by 3 archaeologists that it was working with to keep it in the ground, that it was removed. No archaeologists were present to survey the landscape and record the conditions of a crime scene whose exact location had not been known for 78 years. Professionals were denied the ability to look for traces of writing, to analyze the orientation of the stone while it was still in the ground, to look for artifacts. Important information was lost forever. And Japanese Americans, whose history this museum is dedicated to preserve, were not told about this historic event until after it was over. So this stone represents not only the most sacred object ever found at Topaz, but historians are calling this memorial the most significant historical artifact of all the U.S. World War II concentration camps. That makes the Wakasa Monument a national monument, a symbol of racial violence, justice denied, and the literal burying of history.
The memorial stone was mounted on a cement base and erected as a memorial to him. Thousands attended his funeral. When the government heard about it, they commanded that the stone be destroyed. But the stalwart inmates buried it instead, right here. One of them drew a diagram of the burial site, and almost 80 years later, the map was discovered by Nancy Ukai while doing research in Washington, D.C. Nancy published her story on an online site where 2 archaeologists read it, saw the map, and decided to look for it. drove on their own time to Topaz here, and following the diagram discovered what they thought to be the tip of a stone peeking out from the desert floor. This desert floor. They photographed and made a 5-part article about it with photos, and here we are today. We thank you all for being here with us. Especially, we thank the Topaz Museum for cooperating with this assessment. Most of all, we thank our friends and families for having left us this evidence. We will now hear Mark Izu again playing the show as we attach paper flowers to the fence. Paper flowers were made at the time of Wakasa's funeral, and so we are doing this in commemoration of that event.
It was shortly after Mr. Wakasa was shot that incarcerees started to see the Hinotama, fireball, a luminous white ball 200 to 300 feet in the air in what appeared to be the general direction of where Mr. Wakasa had died. Small crowds would gather to watch this small ball of white light dance and bounce eerily across the desert for several minutes. It happened long ago, but Kiyoshi remembers it so clearly because it sent chills up his spine. The Hinotama came out for several evenings after sunset. Then it stopped. Some of the neighbors wondered if the fireball might have been a reflection of his tamashi, spirit. Could it have been the spirit of Mr. Wakasa's lamenting and powerless cry of injustice? Mr. Wakasa was a neighbor of our family in Block 36. I was there when he was murdered by a U.S. Army Guard, April 11, 1943. The actual spot of his death was kept unknown from us all these almost 80 years. I am deeply offended. We Americans of Japanese ancestry were denied the opportunity to witness, have input, and offer incense in the resurrection of Mr. Wakasa's sacred gravesite. My emotions are raw with pain and regret. We were voiceless then. We protested in silence then, but today no more. I stand arm in arm with those still alive and for those long departed who too loved and honored Mr. James H. Wakasa.